All right, class, I hope you are doing well. This video is about egoism, and we're entering a section of the course devoted to egoism and egotism. The title of the section of the course is called Radical Egotism. So really we're going to focus on people that are invested in themselves, that focus on themselves, that make themselves their number one priority. And this relates back to the course theme and the central course question of how much time and energy should I spend on myself. So this section of the course is devoted to exploring the idea of people that spend all their time, or nearly all their time, either doing what they want, doing what advances their self-interest, or simply those that make their own goals the number one priority in their lives. So to explore this theme, we're going to focus on quite a few case studies that we're going to have some great discussions about, and we're going to really explore in depth. Those case studies include the Sandy Hook Killer, the Westboro Baptist Church, Razor Ramon, a WWE wrestler. For those that are taking this at Newman, the Rab Shuttle, and also Kanye West. But this video is really focused on the theory of ethical egoism. So ethical egoism is a theory that says your goals, your desires are number one. That essentially what you should do is what produces the most overall good for you. So whatever action, whatever rule, whatever characteristics produce more good than bad for you, that's what you should do. So it is a consequentialist moral theory. Consequentialist moral theory means that consequences are what makes an action right or wrong. And the book, Vaughn talks about this. It's a very interesting dichotomy that he references. And he says that, essentially there's a tension in this theory that we feel. Because most of us, intuitively, at first glance, when we hear that we should put ourselves first, that we should focus on our goals and our desires and our wants, would say that's wrong. We would say that self-absorbed, self-interested, selfish people are doing something that they shouldn't be doing, that their focus is off. On the other hand, you often hear people say, look, I've got to put myself first. If nobody's going to look after me, who is? If I don't look after myself, who is going to look after me? So essentially, if we don't focus on me, nobody else is going to. And so that's what we should do. So there's this tension that many of us feel between, on one hand, selfishness is bad. We should be devoted to others. We should, try to promote their interests. We should sacrifice ourselves, or at least some of our desires, for those of others. And on the other hand, you have a vision that says, well, you need to put yourself first, because in the world the way it is, if you don't look after yourself, nobody else is, and you're going to end up miserable or drained or maybe even dead. And so think about, for your own thought, which side do you agree with? Which side strikes you as more plausible, as more real? Now, it's also very important, and this is really, really critical. This is a subtle but very, very important nuance in the theory. Vaughn says self-interest does not equal or necessarily equal selfishness. So ethical egoism as a theory says you should do what advances your self-interest. That's what you should focus on. And whatever produces more self-interest for you, you should do. Vaughn makes the distinction where he says selfishness is essentially doing what you're going to do regardless of how it impacts others, regardless of how it affects others. You essentially just do what you want. And very often that could lead to harm to others. Self-interest, on the other hand, does not necessarily lead to harm to others. In fact, it could lead to you doing lots of good things for others. If you view doing good things for others as being in your self-interest. You could say, well, if I'm going to help out this person, if I'm going to join this club, if I'm going to be part of this team, then that's going to come back to me. They're going to help me out when I need it. And some people could say, well, that's in my self-interest. So selfishness, you're just really not focused on others. With self-interest, you have to take others into consideration. Now, this doesn't mean that the two, selfishness and self-interest, are absolutely separate, because you could determine that it is in your self-interest to harm others. You could say, well, in this case, doing what is not beneficial to others, what harms them, what disrupts their lives, what takes away something from them is actually in my self-interest. So there's not a hard and fast line, but the self-interested person will at least think about others, consider others, in terms of calculating what is in one's best self-interest to do. And in the same way, Vaughan makes the distinction between self-interest and just wanton recklessness, indulgence, doing whatever you want in the moment, doing whatever you feel like doing. Because some people say, well, if you're going to act in your self-interest, you're going to just do whatever makes you feel good at the moment. You're going to skip out on work and go to the beach. You're going to drink and get totally drunk and not go to school the next day. You're not going to care for your kids quite as well because, you don't feel like it at that moment. And Vaughan makes the very important point that might be what you feel like doing at the moment. That might be what a selfish person does. But a self-interested person has to say, well, if I get drunk and blow off school, well, then I'm not going to accomplish my other goals. I'm not going to be able to get a job, and I'm not going to be able to get the things that I really want. Maybe a nice house, financial security, something like that. So a self-interested person is not necessarily going to do whatever makes them feel good at that moment. They're going to do what is in their most their best overall self-interest. And that means they have to also think about the long-term consequences of their decisions. Sorry about that, I'm a little sick. Another important element of this idea of self-interest is thinking about what does it actually mean to be in your self-interest? And you should think about that yourself. If you were to define self-interest for you, if you were to think about what outcomes would be in your self-interest, what goods, what states of being, what kind of feelings, what kind of goals in your self-interest, what would that be? Vaughan mentions a number of them. These are not exclusive. You could certainly think of others. But some of those answers could be the Epicurean answer, where essentially you focus on pleasure. Pleasure is in your self-interest. You're supposed to maximize what makes you feel good. Now, this doesn't necessarily or automatically mean that you do what makes you feel physically good. It could also be what makes you feel emotionally good, what gives you intellectual pleasure. And we're going to talk about this later on in the course, but some have argued that that's actually a more fulfilling, more important, and more stable form of pleasure. You could also say, well, self-actualization, being the best you that you can be, fulfilling your potential, fulfilling your talents, maximizing your talents, whatever those are. Some people said that's really what your self-interest is. Others could say security, being comfortable, not having anxiety, not having to worry. So that might mean being financially secure. That might mean being secure in terms of having friends, so on and so forth. And that could relate to material success. Some people would view that as in their self-interest. Satisfactions of desire is another thing mentioned by Vaughan. So that could be pleasure, but that could also mean other desires that you have. And acquisition of power and ultimately happiness. Again, there could be others, but those are some of the important ways that self-interest has been defined. So if you're going to say, act in your self-interest, you also have to consider, well, what does it actually mean to be in my self-interest? What is my self-interest? Okay, I'm going to skip over a couple parts of the Vaughan book because we're going to be doing that in class. And I want to go right to the critiques of the theory. And the critiques of the theory I'm going to mention here, but they're also very applicable to the major case studies that we're going to do. The Sandy Hook, the Westboro Baptist Church, the Razor Ramon, if you're a Newman student as opposed to a Shanahan student, the Rab Shuttle, and the Kanye West. And so the critiques of the theory is that, one, it says it seems to violate our considered moral judgment. It seems to violate and permit some actions that we would consider fundamentally wrong. In the book, it talks about the son killing his bedridden, elderly, sick father. Essentially, he kills him, puts a pillow over his head, and suffocates him because he wants to get the insurance money. So there's some benefit to him to killing his father. And in this thought experiment, in this hypothetical scenario, Vaughan says, well, the son doesn't feel guilty. So he doesn't have to carry around that burden. He doesn't have to carry around that guilt but he still gets what he wants, which is the money, and nobody else suspects anything. He doesn't have to deal with anger of others. Everybody else is going to think that the father just died of natural death. Also, really think about this in relationship to Sandy Hook and to Westboro Baptist Church. What are they getting out of the actions that the central figures in these stories perform? What is the benefit to them? And so the point, and Vaughn makes this, is that evil actions will not always, in fact, consistently evil actions will hardly ever result in your self-interest. But it could be the case that in a certain scenario, in a certain context, doing what we would consider fundamentally wrong is actually in your self-interest. And Vaughn says, well, that leads us to question the theory. If it allows something that is fundamentally wrong, how can that be an adequate and legitimate moral theory? Violation of impartiality. This is another way in which people critique the theory and says it's fundamentally wrong, it's flawed. Because in most moral theories, the idea is that you should be impartial, that your interests or the interest of another person should not be arbitrarily made more important than someone else. Arbitrarily more important could mean making the interest of someone else more important based on non-moral grounds. So skin color, gender, sexual orientation, or something like that. Those would be grounds to say, if you say this person based on their skin color is more important than another person, you're doing it on skin color, and that is not considered a valid reason to make someone more important. In the same way, this theory essentially says, well, your interests, your personal interests are more important than anybody else's. And that would arbitrarily elevate your own interests, your personal interests, over another person, in fact, over all other persons, for no good reason. There's no good reason that you should be more important than someone else. And so again, we're going to explore this critique in relationship to the case studies, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.